You don't owe anyone an explanation for your peace, not for your silence, not for your boundaries, not for walking away from what no longer feels right. Because here's the thing, people who truly respect you won't demand explanations. They'll see your actions and understand your intentions. But the ones who don't, they'll twist your words until you start questioning your own truth. So stop explaining your worth to people who've already decided not to see it. You don't need to defend your peace. You just need to live it. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself, you start living for yourself. You don't need to defend your peace to people who thrive on your chaos. Think about that for a moment. The people who constantly question your decisions, who twist your words, who seem offended when you start protecting your energy, they're not confused. They understand exactly what you're doing. They just don't benefit from it anymore. Because when you stop engaging in unnecessary drama, when you stop explaining and start observing, you take away the fuel they survive on. Peace starves people who live off your reaction. Chaos is their comfort zone, and your calmness threatens it. There's a pattern to this. Some people don't actually want to see you peaceful. They want to see you predictable. They want the version of you that overthinks, that over-explains, that gets emotional and defensive every time they press the right button. They know exactly where those buttons are because you taught them over time through explanations, justifications, and emotional reactions. You've shown them what gets to you. So when you start choosing peace over reaction, when you no longer explain or engage, you break that pattern. And when you break that pattern, they lose access. That's why they get louder, colder, or distant. Not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped feeding what was never healthy for you. Defending your peace doesn't require proof. It requires discipline. Discipline to walk away from arguments that go nowhere. Discipline to stay silent when you know your truth is being twisted. Discipline to let people misunderstand you without trying to fix their perception. That's hard. Because we're wired to want to be understood. We want fairness, closure, validation. But peace doesn't live in those things. Peace lives in your ability to say, I know what I meant. I know who I am. I don't need to prove it. When you start operating from that space, something shifts. You begin to realize that most people aren't listening to understand. They're listening to respond. They're not interested in your truth. They're invested in keeping their version of the story alive. And if you spend your energy defending yourself to them, you'll never have enough left to build the life you deserve. You'll stay trapped in cycles of explanation that go nowhere, circles that always end with you feeling drained and unseen. Protecting your peace means understanding that silence isn't weakness. It's emotional intelligence. It's you saying, I know my worth, and I don't need to fight for acknowledgement. There's power in that restraint. Not every insult needs a defense. Not every accusation needs clarification. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply not engage, because every time you argue with someone who thrives on chaos, you step into their arena. And in their arena, you always lose, even when you're right. Peace isn't passive. It's intentional. It's you choosing to stay grounded while others try to shake your balance. It's you saying, I won't match your energy, I'll protect mine. It's not about pretending everything is fine. It's about knowing what deserves your response and what deserves your silence. You'll know you're growing when you stop reacting and start observing. You'll see the patterns. The same arguments, the same manipulations, the same guilt tactics. And one day, you'll catch yourself not reacting the way you used to. That's growth. That's strength. The people who thrive on your chaos will notice the change before you do. They'll call you distant, cold, selfish, or arrogant. They'll say you've changed, and they'll be right. You have changed. You've outgrown the version of yourself that needed to explain everything just to keep the peace. You've learned that keeping the peace and having peace are two very different things. One requires constant sacrifice, the other requires boundaries. One drains you, the other restores you. When you defend your peace, you start losing people, but you also start finding yourself. The relationships that were built on your compliance will crumble, but the ones built on mutual respect will deepen. Because the right people don't need you to defend your peace, they protect it with you. They don't take your silence personally. They don't guilt you for setting limits. They understand that peace isn't selfish, it's sacred, and only people who truly value you will want to see you at peace. It takes courage to let go of chaos, especially when you've spent years living in it. When drama was your normal, peace feels unfamiliar at first. You'll feel guilty for not reacting. You'll question whether you're being too harsh, too detached, too quiet. That's your old conditioning talking. You've been taught that love means explaining, fixing, smoothing things over. But that's not love. That's emotional labor for people who never reciprocated it. Real love doesn't make you defend your peace. It exists within it. The more you grow, the more you'll realize that peace has a cost, and that cost is distance. Distance from people who no longer align with your calm. Distance from conversations that drain more than they give. Distance from environments that keep you in constant defense mode. But that distance isn't loss. It's protection. It's space for peace to breathe. When someone thrives on chaos, your peace exposes their instability. They'll try to provoke you, not because they hate you, but because they need the chaos to feel connected. It's how they maintain control. But when you stay grounded, when you respond with calm instead of reaction, they lose that control. They have to face themselves without your energy to distract them. That's when they start saying things like, "You've changed," or "You're different." Yes, you're different. You've evolved. You've learned that peace is not found in explanation, but in acceptance. Peace doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to exist. And when it does, the noise of others no longer holds the same power. You start seeing clearly who adds to your peace and who subtracts from it. You stop chasing clarity from people who confuse you on purpose. You stop defending your intentions to people who misinterpret them by choice. You stop giving energy to things that don't deserve it. Defending your peace is not about cutting everyone off. It's about knowing who can stay close without disturbing your calm. It's about realizing that not everyone deserves access to your emotional space. Your peace is not public property. It's a boundary, not a gift to be handed out freely. You get to decide who enters and who doesn't. And if someone can't respect that, they were never meant to be there in the first place. In time, you'll realize that true power doesn't come from explaining yourself to be understood. It comes from standing firm in your truth, even when you're misunderstood. You don't need to defend your peace to people who thrive on your chaos, because peace doesn't need defense. It just needs protection. Explaining yourself to the wrong person is just another form of seeking approval. It sounds harmless when you say it. I just want them to understand. But behind that need to be understood is often a quiet craving for validation. You want them to see your heart, your intentions, your truth. Yet the hard truth is, some people aren't trying to understand you. They're trying to control the narrative about you. And no matter how many times you explain, they'll twist your words until you start doubting your own story. That's when you realize explaining yourself has nothing to do with clarity and everything to do with approval. There's a difference between communicating and explaining. Communication is two people trying to meet in the middle. Explanation, when it's one-sided, is you standing in front of someone who's already decided what they want to believe. You're not actually talking to them. You're defending yourself against their assumptions. And the more you explain, the deeper you sink into their version of reality. You start using their words to describe your actions, their emotions to define your intentions, their standards to measure your worth. That's not understanding. That's manipulation dressed as conversation. When you find yourself over-explaining, stop and ask, what am I trying to prove? Am I trying to be understood, or am I trying to be accepted? Because those two aren't the same. You can be completely understood and still rejected. You can explain your heart in the clearest way possible, and someone will still say you're wrong, not because you are, but because accepting your truth means confronting theirs. And some people would rather keep misunderstanding you than admit that they're the problem. When you explain yourself to the wrong person, you hand them the power to validate your emotions. You give them permission to decide if your pain is justified, if your boundaries are reasonable, if your choices make sense. And when they don't agree, you start questioning yourself instead of questioning why their opinion matters so much. That's how approval becomes a cage. It looks like connection, but it's really control. You start performing for acceptance instead of living for peace. Approval seekers are often misunderstood. People think they're weak or insecure, but in reality, they're usually just kind. They care deeply. They want to be fair. They want everyone to feel heard, even the people who never give them the same grace. But there comes a point when kindness becomes self-betrayal. When you explain yourself just to avoid tension, you're choosing comfort over honesty, and comfort doesn't heal. It just delays confrontation with others and with yourself. The truth is, you don't owe an explanation to people who question your growth, your healing, your peace. Growth changes your behavior. Healing changes your boundaries. Peace changes your priorities. The people who are meant to stay in your life will recognize that. They won't need a detailed explanation every time you shift directions. They'll trust your heart even when they don't understand your choices. But the wrong people will demand explanations not to connect, but to control. They'll use your words as ammunition later. They'll remember your vulnerability, but forget your value. Explaining yourself to the wrong person is like arguing with a wall that only echoes back your insecurities. No matter what you say, it bounces back distorted. You start thinking if you just said it better, they'd finally get it. But they won't, not because your explanation is unclear, but because their intention isn't to understand. Their goal is to keep you explaining, because as long as you're explaining, you're still trying. And as long as you're trying, they still have control. There's a quiet power in saying less, in letting people believe what they want, while you keep doing what's right for you. It takes strength to stand in silence when you know someone is misjudging you. It takes maturity to stop trying to convince someone who's committed to misunderstanding you. That silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You've learned that some people hear only what keeps their story intact, and no amount of explaining can fix that. Approval is a moving target. The moment you hit it, someone changes the rules. Today, it's you're too quiet. Tomorrow, it's you're too bold. You can exhaust yourself trying to fit into expectations that were never designed to honor your individuality. Every time you bend to please someone, you step further away from yourself. You start living in reaction, not intention. And eventually, you forget what peace feels like. When you stop explaining yourself, you start reclaiming your energy. You stop performing and start existing. You realize that you don't have to defend every decision. You don't have to prove your worth with long explanations. The right people won't need them, and the wrong people won't believe them. Either way, your peace remains untouched. Explaining yourself is a habit that comes from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood. But once you outgrow that fear, you realize misunderstanding isn't the end of the world. It's just part of being authentic. Because when you live honestly, not everyone will agree with you. And that's okay. You weren't meant to be understood by everyone. You were meant to be at peace with yourself. When you stop explaining yourself, you start trusting yourself. You stop asking, do they get me? And start asking, do I get me? That's where your confidence grows, in that quiet space where you no longer need external validation to confirm internal truth. You begin to choose your own understanding over their approval. And that's not arrogance, that's self-respect. People who value you won't need an explanation to treat you right. They'll listen, not to respond, but to understand. They'll accept your boundaries without making you feel guilty. They'll see your silence as peace, not distance. Those are the people worth keeping. Everyone else, the ones who demand explanations but never offer empathy, they were never looking for truth, only control. So stop explaining your choices to those who wouldn't make them. Stop justifying your boundaries to those who violate them. Stop defending your growth to those who fear their own stagnation. Let your actions speak for you. Let your peace prove your point. Because when you no longer seek approval, you gain something better, freedom. Freedom from overthinking, from guilt, from the need to be liked. There's a version of you that no longer explains, no longer defends, no longer chases approval. That version of you walks in quiet confidence. They don't need to convince anyone anymore because they know. They know their heart, their reasons, their worth. They know that explaining yourself to the wrong person doesn't earn understanding. It just costs you peace. Boundaries don't need justification. They need consistency. That's something most people misunderstand. They think setting a boundary means giving a speech, offering reasons, or convincing others to respect it. But that's not what real boundaries are. A real boundary isn't about making someone else understand. It's about deciding what you will and will not allow, and then holding that line no matter how someone reacts. Boundaries aren't about control, they're about clarity. They're not meant to change others. They're meant to protect you. When you start setting boundaries, people will test them, especially those who benefited when you didn't have any. They'll act confused, offended, or even hurt. They'll say you've changed, and they're right. You've started choosing peace over people, pleasing, calm over chaos, self-respect over validation. But when you try to explain those boundaries, every time someone pushes them, you weaken them. Because boundaries don't get stronger through explanation, they get stronger through repetition, through consistency. Through the quiet message your actions send, I meant what I said. There's a reason consistency is more powerful than words. People may not respect what you say, but they'll eventually respect what you enforce. Every time you draw a line and hold it, you teach others how to treat you. You teach them what's acceptable and what's not. But when you draw a line and then move it because someone guilted you, manipulated you, or played the victim, you teach them something else. That your boundaries are flexible, that your peace is negotiable. And once they learn that, they'll test you again. Consistency doesn't mean being cold or distant. It means being clear. You can be kind and still firm. You can say no without anger. You can walk away without drama. That's what emotional maturity looks like, protecting your space without needing to prove a point. Because you're not setting boundaries to punish others, you're setting them to protect your peace. People who truly care about you will respect that. Those who don't will take it personally, because your boundary exposes their entitlement. The hardest part about boundaries isn't setting them. It's keeping them when someone you love is on the other side. It's saying, I can't keep doing this, even when your heart wants to make an exception. It's holding your silence when they try to pull you back into old habits of over-explaining. It's choosing discomfort today to protect your peace tomorrow. That's where real growth happens, in those quiet moments where you choose self-respect over connection that costs you your sanity. When you start living with consistent boundaries, you start seeing people's true intentions. The ones who value your well-being will adjust. They'll ask what you need, they'll give you space, they'll honor your limits. But the ones who only valued your compliance will resist. They'll guilt trip you, they'll question your loyalty, they'll make you feel like the bad person for having needs. Don't fall for it. Their reaction isn't proof that your boundary is wrong. It's proof that your boundary is working. Boundaries are a reflection of self-awareness. They say, I know what drains me. I know what triggers me. I know what brings me peace. You're not responsible for how others respond to that awareness. You're responsible for honoring it. And the more consistent you are, the more peaceful your life becomes. Because consistency brings clarity. It removes the confusion that comes from mixed signals and half-hearted limits. People stop wondering where they stand because you've shown them, not through long explanations, but through steady behavior. Some people will accuse you of being too strict, too sensitive, or too distant. That's fine. Those are the labels people use when they can no longer access you the way they used to. When you stop allowing emotional chaos, you become a mirror. You reflect back to people their own lack of boundaries. That makes them uncomfortable, but that's not your burden to carry. You're not responsible for their discomfort. You're responsible for your peace. Boundaries don't require loud declarations. They require quiet follow-through. It's not what you announce that matters. It's what you repeat. It's in the text you don't reply to at midnight, the argument you don't entertain, the explanation you don't give, the energy you no longer match. Those are your boundaries in action. That's what consistency looks like. It's not dramatic, it's disciplined. Consistency is where your power lies. Anyone can set a boundary once. It's easy to say, I'm done, or I won't tolerate this again. But the real test is what you do the next time the situation repeats. Do you hold the line, or do you bend it out of fear of losing someone? Because if you keep bending it, you're teaching yourself that your peace isn't worth protecting. And every time you compromise what you know is right for you, you lose a little more trust in yourself. The truth is, people don't respect what you say. They respect what you tolerate. You don't have to justify why you're doing less, why you're saying no, or why you've pulled back. You just have to keep doing it. Eventually, your consistency will speak louder than any explanation ever could. The ones who truly care will adjust, and the ones who don't will leave. Either outcome brings peace. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks. You decide who gets a key. You decide when to open and when to close. That's not selfish. That's self-respect. You can love someone deeply and still limit how much of you they have access to. You can care and still choose distance. You can forgive and still protect yourself. Those are not contradictions. They're balance. Consistency teaches people that your words mean something. It builds credibility, not just with others, but with yourself. You start believing in your own strength again. You start realizing that you don't have to explain your boundaries. You just have to live them. You don't have to convince anyone that you deserve peace. You just have to stop inviting chaos. And over time, that consistency becomes confidence. You stop asking, is it okay if I protect my peace? And start saying, this is what my peace requires. It's not your job to make everyone comfortable with your boundaries. It's your job to honor them until your peace feels normal again. You'll lose some people in the process, but you'll gain something far more valuable: trust in yourself. the kind of trust that doesn't need validation or approval, the kind that comes from showing up for yourself over and over again, even when it's hard. Boundaries don't need justification. They need consistency, because consistency is what turns self-awareness into self-respect, and self-respect into peace. Silence is your strongest response when your actions already speak your truth, because silence isn't empty. It's full of power, control, and restraint. It's the pause that says, I don't need to convince you. I don't need to defend myself. I know who I am. And in a world where everyone's talking, posting, reacting, and arguing, silence becomes rare, and that's why it's powerful. Most people speak out of impulse, emotion, or ego. But silence speaks from understanding. It's the language of people who no longer need to prove their worth to anyone. There's a difference between being quiet and being silent. Quiet can come from fear. Silence comes from strength. Quiet hides. Silence decides. Silence isn't about giving up. It's about rising above. When you know your intentions are pure, when your actions align with your values, when your peace means more than someone else's opinion, you learn that explaining yourself isn't necessary anymore, because truth doesn't need to shout. It simply exists. People who misunderstand your silence often do so because they expect chaos. They're used to you reacting, over-explaining, apologizing, defending. They expect the long messages, the emotional calls, the endless justification. But when you stop responding that way, when you stay calm, grounded, and silent, it confuses them. Your silence breaks the pattern they're used to controlling. It takes away their favorite weapon, your reaction. Because once you stop reacting, they lose power. Silence creates space for you to think, to breathe, to heal. It's in that space that you begin to see things clearly. You start recognizing manipulation for what it is. You start realizing which conversations are meant for understanding and which are traps for control. And suddenly, you stop rushing to explain yourself because you know the truth doesn't change based on who believes it. Whether they accept it or not, your truth stands. That's what silence protects. Not every attack deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Some things are better left unanswered, not because you don't care, but because you do care about your peace more. You realize that engaging with someone who's committed to misunderstanding you is like arguing with an echo. It just repeats your pain back to you. Silence ends that cycle. It stops the noise. It's you saying, this is not worth my energy. There's a quiet dignity in silence. When you choose not to explain yourself, you're telling the world, I'm at peace with what I know. You're not seeking to be right. You're seeking to stay centered. Because peace isn't about winning arguments. It's about not needing to have them in the first place. People may mistake your silence for weakness, but that's only because they can't hear the strength behind it. Silence doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It doesn't perform. It just is. Your silence becomes powerful when it's paired with consistent action. Because when your life starts aligning with your values, your actions start doing all the talking. You don't need to post about your growth. People will see it. You don't need to announce your healing. Your peace will show it. You don't need to argue for your boundaries. Your absence from toxic situations will prove it. That's the beauty of silence. It lets your results speak louder than your explanations ever could. Sometimes silence is your best response, not because you don't have words, but because your words won't matter to someone who isn't ready to listen. You could explain yourself 100 times, and they'd still twist it to fit their version of the story. So instead of wasting energy trying to correct their narrative, you stay silent and let time reveal the truth. Because time always does. Truth doesn't need defending, it just needs patience. Silence also protects your emotional energy. Every time you respond to negativity, You give a piece of yourself away. You let someone else pull you out of your calm and into their chaos. But when you stay silent, you stay in control. You decide when to speak, how to act, and what deserves your attention. That's what emotional maturity looks like. Not needing to say everything just to prove something. It's not easy to stay silent, especially when you know you're being misjudged, misunderstood, or falsely accused. The urge to defend yourself feels natural. It's human. But silence teaches you trust. Trust in your truth, in your peace, in the fact that you don't need to fight every battle to prove your integrity. People who are genuinely observant will notice your consistency. They'll see your actions align with your character. The rest were never looking for truth. They were looking for drama, and silence starves drama. There's a reason wise people are often quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand that not every situation deserves their voice. They've learned the difference between being right and being at peace. They know that sometimes walking away in silence says more than any explanation ever could. Silence is not submission, it's selection. It's choosing where to invest your voice and where to protect it. When you start practicing silence, you'll notice how uncomfortable it makes others. People who feed on reactions will try harder to provoke you. They'll push, insult, manipulate, and guilt trip you. Anything to make you break your silence. Don't. The moment you react, they win. The moment you respond with calm stillness, you win. Silence isn't weakness, it's control. It's you deciding that peace is more valuable than proving a point. Silence also changes how you view yourself. You stop feeling the need to be understood by everyone, and you start feeling proud of understanding yourself. You stop needing closure from people who never gave you clarity, because your peace becomes your closure. And you realize that silence doesn't mean absence, it means presence. Presence of mind, presence of control, presence of strength. Your silence speaks volumes. It says, I'm done arguing for my worth. It says, I've said all I needed to say through how I live. It says, you no longer have access to my emotional space. And that's what peace sounds like: quiet, steady, unshakable. You stop seeking to be heard, and you start being understood by the only person who truly matters: yourself. The strongest response isn't always loud. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just silence, a calm, confident silence that says, my actions will show you what my words no longer need to. Because at the end of the day, people remember what you do long after they forget what you said. And when your actions align with truth, your silence becomes the loudest statement you'll ever make.